And good morning from wherever you're watching us in Kenya and across East Africa. I am Ann Kiguta. Welcome to Citizen Extra. Here are the stories that we're following for you this morning. Plans are underway to swear in President-elect Uhuru Kenyatta on Tuesday. We're keeping an eye at the preparations for this event. He will be sworn in for a second and final term under a turbulent political period. We're also watching for NASA's next move. The opposition coalition had promised to give an official position that expected in about 4 days or so. Its front runner, Raila Odinga, expected to be the man making the announcement. We're looking at what possibilities they may be exploring as a way forward with a swearing in of the president-elect looming. And amid all this, calls for dialogue persist as the country is uncertain about the political climate. We'll be getting opinion from our panelists and across the country on what should talks center on. Details very shortly. And a little later, we'll have a beauty in studio. Magdalene Jeruto has been crowned Miss World Africa. We'll be speaking to her very shortly on her incredible performance globally. And joining me in studio, I've got a panel like no other. To my immediate right is Dr. Sam Kamau. He is a political analyst. Next to him is Dr. Joseph Simeha, also a political analyst. Next to him is Priscilla Nyokabi, an advocate and former politician. And next to her is Francis Gashuri, our very own. He's a senior political reporter and show host on Inoro TV. And good morning to you all. You're welcome to the program. Gashuri, let's start with you and talk about the plans to swear in the president-elect. What do we know so far? The Assumption of Office committee has been sitting. What details can you give?
Yes, the committee has been meeting since the Supreme Court judges in that unanimous decision decided to uphold the re-election of President Uhuru Kenyatta. And yes, we were there on Monday. The subcommittee on security, logistics and protocol was at the Kasarani Stadium to begin where they left it when the Supreme Court annulled the August presidential election. And from what Joseph Irongo, who is the chair of that subcommittee, told us is that they're expecting about 100,000 people. Kasarani Stadium is a 60,000-seater stadium, but they have areas where they can accommodate the spillovers at the Kasarani Sports Village and other areas. And he told us they're also expecting up to 100 top dignitaries, representatives of other foreign nations. And of course there has been controversy about the number of congratulations that President Uhuru Kenyatta has received. Some alleged to have been fake or thereabout, but we wait to hear how the State House will be responding to those allegations. But yes, the preparations are ongoing. The military has taken over the stadium to prepare for the parade and other military fanfare that will be happening on Tuesday. And I think from today there will be accreditation for the media to start preparing for the swearing-in ceremony. But let's see how the event will be. Although it will have some certain departures from what we saw in 2013. Some of the things that we saw then will not be happening this time. And let's see how it will be happening.
Okay,
but
what departures can we expect?
In 2013, we saw President Mwai Kibaki handing over power to President Uhuru Kenyatta. This time that will not be happening because he's not being handed over power to by anybody. He already has those powers. We saw him being handed over the military sword. That will not happen because he already has it. So basically, I think it's just taking the oath of office, the 2 oaths, and signing the necessary documents together with his deputy. And other than that, the military fanfare and stuff. Then the speeches
what can we expect in terms of security arrangements for the day? Obviously, he is going to be sworn in still under a fairly tense political climate.
I think it will be obviously tight. Even that day when we went to Kasarani Stadium on Monday, it was very difficult to access the stadium because they're saying it's now a security zone. It's now a security operation area. So you can expect that even that time it will also be quite tight. Bearing in mind that when you're hosting such a huge crowd of people and the current situation that we have in the country, you would expect that they will tighten the security a little bit more. But obviously, the swearing-in ceremony has to be done publicly. Everybody has to be able to see what's happening.
Right.
And so we hope that they will be able to manage the crowds that will be coming to avoid any situation that could lead to a stampede.
Okay. Let me start with you, Simeha. Your thoughts on this upcoming swearing-in of the president-elect?
Yes, I know which swearing-in you're talking about, so worry not. I hardly have any thoughts about it because I'm not paying attention to it. As you know that I'm a member of NASA and we have serious problems with President Uhuru and those who, President Uhuru is saying that he's a legitimately elected president and those who support that. You know that we have problems with that. We do not recognize the legitimacy of his election. We therefore are replanning and re-strategizing on our political program on how to counter the fraud, the electoral fraud, plus how to continue the push for what we see as very necessary governance and economic reforms in the country, which the collapse of governance being what has led to where, in our opinion, in our observation, we are just now. So when you ask me whether I have any thoughts, none whatsoever,
because I mean, not, obviously, and you know, I like what you've talked about in terms of the re-strategy, and that will be our secondary topic very shortly. I'd love to get into details on that. But when I ask you about your thoughts, it's because whereas NASA has said that it does not recognize the election that took place on October 26th, and all the other reasons you've mentioned just now, this is a reality of the day that the president, under this constitution, the president-elect is going to be sworn in. So can you afford to entirely ignore the affairs as though it didn't happen, yet it is going to affect the way in which the country is governed under this constitution?
Well, a lot of things happen in this country which, are illegitimate, which we do not agree with, but they still happen anyhow. The 26th, if I may remind you, we didn't recognize, we didn't participate, we stayed very far away from it, but it did happen, didn't it? The petitions at the Supreme Court and the decisions thereof, we were not party to them. We didn't pay attention, but they still happened. And a lot more things, both good and bad, happen in this country, which you don't have any obligation to recognize if you don't want to recognize. But this one, as a matter of public, the difference between what those that are private and public, this one is a matter of public concern, public interest. We do not recognize, but it will still happen. What we are fighting, which is electoral fraud, is something that we do not like, we do not recognize, but it still happens in this country anyhow. So, it doesn't mean that it can only happen if everybody recognizes it. Yes, it will still go ahead and happen, just as our political program will continue happening. We know that Uhuru Kenyatta, Ruto, and the rest of Jubilee, for example, do not recognize our political program. They consider it illegitimate. They consider it, in fact, they normally say unconstitutional and illegal, but it still happens anyhow. So it will still happen. It's none of our interest. It's not in our interest. So we are not paying attention at all. We are paying attention to what we consider to be of higher priority to us and the nation than what you are asking me about.
All right. Priscilla?
I think the biggest highlight for me about the swearing in is going to be the president's speech and how he shapes the next of his 5-year program. We've lost quite some time in terms of economic development, so I'm personally really looking forward to what he's going to say, the programs on health, the programs on education, the programs on security, and most important, the issues that NASA is raising. I think as a president, he will not be able to close his eyes to what's going on in this country. So the legalities go on. The country moves on. We closed the electoral cycle because really we had to close it at some point in time. So close the electoral cycle, let the country make the next steps in terms of moving forward, and then come back. I hope that this NASA strategy of going parallel is going to come to an end. I think that it is time that we got into these governance reforms as a country. So we're going to be looking forward to what the president is going to say about how the country is going to move forward economically, but also most importantly, what's going to happen in terms of the issues that NASA is raising, which have got to find space within the constitutional framework. We'll be very sad if we go back to demonstrations and if we go back to all of these disruptive ways of expressing ourselves. There must be better ways of expression, and part of the speech by the president then will be that. I think that the opposition leader, Raila Odinga, will also equally be expected to give a speech that moves the country closer to the center as opposed to these very opposing views. So even he is under spotlight, mostly the president in terms of the economic agenda. Many people are waiting. You know that a lot of the development projects, the dams, the roads, they've all sort of been in a halt. So those have got to start moving a little bit faster. The president's speech in terms of how he's going to deal with the rest of the country that is not supporting him, and the opposition leader also, what he's going to say to those of us who support President Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta, and also what is his view about the next 5 years. I don't think we can afford this for 5 years. It's going to be too long for a country to go in that direction.
And so when you hear some of the NASA luminaries say, I mean, they do not recognize the position of the president-elect, and then, you know, the president, they don't recognize this government. I mean, where does that leave Jubilee? How do you lead a country when half of it does not recognize your legitimacy?
Well, there's a big question on whether it's half. So we're going to start with the mathematics of it. I mean, say a part of the country doesn't quite...
fair comment.
Yes, part of the country doesn't recognize you. So that is true. But what has happened is the position by NASA on non-recognition is not backed by law. So I don't know for how long you can ignore the law of the country. I don't know, Simeha is here and we've known each other for a fairly long time. I don't know how long. You said there would be no election and nobody could believe you because the Constitution says we're going to have an election. The Supreme Court says we're going to have an election. So even now, the Chief Justice is going to swear the president. The country will have a president. I don't know for how long you can sustain the claim that there is no president. Maybe for a short time, for as long as your emotions are still high, but I think those emotions are going to have to come down and we get into the legalities. So I see a period of turbulence just after the swearing in, not violence, just this political turbulence in terms of the positions and viewpoints. But just after, by the time we come to 2018, by the time we're going on to Christmas, I think that NASA needs to have agreed to come onto some position of a formal engagement. And some of the claims that NASA has are claims that I think, looking at the Constitution, looking at the laws, there are some claims that can be accommodated. In any case, all of us want an improved election in 2022, but we can't keep on political reforms, we can't keep on the electoral cycle. The economy is suffering, and it is suffering even for NASA. When the economy suffers, it suffers for everybody. Right. So we are hoping that as early as end of November, early December, we are on to a different conversation in this country.
Dr. Kamau, what do you think about the political environment in which the president-elect will be sworn in?
Anne, if you could allow me to comment about this. I have three quick observations. One, in terms of the swearing in, is a constitutional imperative, in the sense that these are timelines that are stipulated by the Constitution, and I think signifies the culmination of a long process, drawn-out process, that started with the nominations, the campaigns, the elections on August 8, which were nullified, the court process, then the repeat elections, and then the court process again. So this swearing in is a constitutional provision and imperative that we are bound by. The other thing is, when I look at this, is actually a triumph of the Constitution in terms of, despite the current challenges in the political environment and the different contestations, I think the Constitution has given specific provision. I think this is one of those. I would say the Constitution winning in the sense that we are following the timelines that have been stipulated by the Constitution. The second issue, which is quite significant, is what you would call now the closure of the electioneering season. I know the country has been caught up in this process where we are not able to make decisions on other important issues because of our concentration on politics. And I think this period now signifies that time where I would say that is a culmination of this season. But the third thing which I find now most significant is when President Uhuru now starts his second term. It means then the hard work begins. And that is not ignoring the fact that there is still a significant part of this country that does not agree with how things have been happening. The other thing, and for me this is really, I would almost call it personal, is that we have privileged politics over everything else, such that we have ignored the real issues that affect the ordinary mwananchi. I would say for this political process, which has actually created fatigue in the ordinary mwananchi, there are other issues that are more burning. When I actually talk even about some of the concerns by NASA, the feelings of exclusion, when you talk about poverty, when you talk about unemployment, when you talk about extreme poverty, and those other issues which are more important, but we have privileged politics over them, or we have actually used politics, politicized all these issues in terms of what I refer to as feelings of exclusion. You're talking about the unemployment. when we politicize them and then also add the ethnic angle, we are actually not able to solve these issues. So I would look at this swearing in as an opportunity to move the country forward so that we can actually start focusing on those issues. And politics perhaps take, I wouldn't say a backseat, but at least our obsession and focusing on it, we can actually move on to discussing other important issues and look for ways to actually resolve them.
Okay. Gachuri, you've been on the campaign trail with both candidates, not just in this election, but the previous one. And so in your understanding, what will the pressing political questions be going forward? Obviously, NASA very much has argued on the legitimacy angle of this presidency. What else do you think is there to consider?
It will be important to note what will be happening on Tuesday, both ends. Because while President Uhuru Kenyatta and his deputy will be sworn in at the Kasarani Stadium, most obviously the NASA team will have a parallel kind of a function elsewhere. I've had people say there will be a parallel swearing-in ceremony by the NASA team that we're not sure about.
Right.
But definitely there will be something happening elsewhere. And what will be also important is how the state security team deals or responds to whatever the NASA team will be doing. There have been questions about what happened when the NASA leader was coming back from his 10-day trip.
Yes.
The altercation between the security agents and the NASA supporters. Questions have been raised on whether the altercation was necessary or unnecessary, whether it would have been better for the security agents to lead the NASA team quietly to wherever they were going to avoid the confrontation. And so that scenario is likely to play out again on Tuesday because just like Semeha says, they have their different arrangements, their different plans and strategies. The Jubilee team also has its own strategies. And bearing in mind that when you look at the assumptions to the Office of the President Act, that Section 12, that day will be a public holiday. It is likely going to be gazetted maybe today or tomorrow as a public holiday. So quite a number of people will be free and at home, so there won't be people, let's say, basically going to work on that day. So you can expect there will be a different function by the NASA team. We will wait to hear the details of that. But most importantly, like Priscilla says, we will, as a country and as members of the media, we'll be very keen to hear what the president has to say. Because on one hand, he has to assume power, as outlined in the Constitution, but also he has to bring the country together, bearing in mind that one cannot deny the fact that the country is fractured as we speak. Those who don't recognize him are Kenyans. Those who recognize him are also equally Kenyans. So how he deals with the two sides of the political divide is important. And there's no better way to listen to, or for him to set out his agenda than the speech he'll be making while he's being sworn in for a second term. The question of bringing people together. When he was being handed the certificate at Bomas of Kenya, he said that he will only dialogue once the constitutional mechanisms have been exhausted. And I think for now, in terms of contesting his re-election at the court is done. So what is it that he intends to do to bring the other team together and make every part of this country feel that it is part of it and that it is considered?
Yeah, but in terms of the political environment and this to you, Priscilla, is it going to be, I mean, obviously the Constitution requires this process to go ahead, but I wonder, given the fracture that Gachuri has alluded to in the country, can we really expect a ceremony that is full of pomp and color and, you know, all those high notes that we know Jubilee is quite accustomed to in terms of their public presentation? Will that be in good taste?
I think that would have to happen, not so much because of the fracture, but so much because you're celebrating a long period of time. And also, look at the president. He had won on the 8th August election, and then we've had a period of 60 days. I mean, these things are difficult for everybody. So the celebration is not so much to spite other people. It's a celebration just that we are here as a country. We've survived. We are peaceful. We are happy. I mean, that's the celebration, and I think it should go on. to the extent that the Constitution allows it. There has been this call for toning down some of that celebration, but I think that there are also good reasons. I mean, this has been a difficult year for all of us, holding our breath. It's just a good day. That it's just like how we felt when the Supreme Court the other day said that the election is okay and okayed that election. It's a relief that that phase of the process is over. So even that celebration will be a relief that we are up to this point. We are going by milestones now, so we are up to this milestone as well. So that's what the celebration will be about. The thing about the swearing-in day is that this country has had difficult questions. This is not the first time that these questions are coming up. Our entire constitution is nothing but trying to resolve the questions of how our ethnic communities are going to live together in the space called Kenya. So I think what we are seeing is that that conversation is not over. The only sad thing is that it is taking the tone of one person. If it takes only the tone of Raila Odinga as only the person personifying this conversation, that becomes a bit difficult. But in terms of having issues that as a country we need to deal with, how the communities coexist, how we have cohesion, but more important now, the only questions that we have on poverty is when the cake is larger. The larger the cake we have, the more we have to share, and the more we can address questions of regional disparity. The more time we spend fighting on politics, the less we have to share, so the more the fight is. Like a family that has a small bread. If you have a small bread, you will kill each other for a small bread, when you could have baked a bigger bread that allows you in Nyanza get your share, you in Coast get your share, and that way there is a little bit more suppose. I mean, mtacha kukagana sana when the space is expanded. So that's what the president now needs to move this country to. Let's expand this country. We hear the underlying issues, nothing to celebrate about those underlying issues. So once the swearing in is over and the president has assumed office, as you form government, usually you are alive to those situations. So you form government in a way that shows you have a national inclusion. You form programs that show national inclusion. You pursue development in a way that shows a national inclusion. The Constitution is now 7 years old, has been tested in 2 elections. The opposition needs to play a role, very, very strong role of how the governance of this country moves forward. If there are questions about how the opposition is led, for example, the view that now the main leader of the opposition is outside the institutions of governance. So you have Raila Odinga, who's the main leader of the opposition, being outside Senate, being outside the National Assembly. I think that is now a question that can be addressed. If this opposition is going to address the issues of our country properly, then maybe there is a gap in terms of having the main leaders outside of Parliament. I mean, it was the same because the president and the deputy are also outside of the assembly, even though many of their parliamentarians are in the assembly, but they are in the executive. They are not exactly outside. They are in the executive, running affairs from the executive, and their parliamentarians working from the National Assembly. So the claim that the opposition cannot be effective for as long as the opposition leader is outside the institution of governance, I think that's now, those are questions that can now be addressed after the swearing in.
Simeha, you know, earlier you talked about the fact that a lot of bad things happen in the country, and you know, what can you do? They happen. Given that you do not recognize this presidency, and yet it is going to be a reality. They will have the full instruments of power, etc., and be going about their business. Priscilla is talking about that weakness of not having strong voices or the strong leadership of the so-called opposition in Parliament. Is it going to be necessary, though, still for NASA to formally re-engage through the legislative arm if they're going to check this government or even advance their cause against its perceived illegitimacy, I mean, from your perspective?
You know, and history is replete with examples of autocratic regimes, oppressive regimes that have been fought by coalitions, networks, and groups of people who do not hold any public office, who are not anywhere near the institutions of governance of those countries, including our own, especially when those institutions also, further that oppression. So to change the country for the better, to fight the fraud in this country, the illegitimacy, it doesn't have to happen in Parliament. It doesn't have to happen in the executive. Apartheid was a reality, because you are saying this is a reality. It was a reality. Colonialism in this country was a reality, but it was fought and defeated. Moi's dictatorship was a reality. It was fought, especially by people from outside of institutions of governance, in the streets, in fact, especially, and it was defeated. And this is also going to be fought and defeated. We do not have to be in the executive. We do not have to be in parliament to fight this and defeat it. And we will, and we are totally determined, and we are going ahead to fight it and defeat it for the sake of the nation. Actually, for the sake of everyone, including Uhuru and Ruto themselves. Priscilla here says, let's out something that, amongst many other things that disturbs us a lot, that when complaints are issued about oppression, about, for example, police brutality, misgovernance, failure of governance, and so on, they are classified as Raila Odinga's complaints. Here I am sitting with her on this show, just next to her, raising these complaints, but she doesn't see Simeha raising these complaints. She sees Raila Odinga.
No, I didn't say that.
She said, you said the personification, but you do not accept the personification of these complaints. But here I am in my own right, as a Kenyan who has been raising these complaints, and I'm making this not just as a member of NASA, but also just as Simeha. But that's what they see. They just see any complaint as Raila Odinga, and they see that you have to fight these complaints because you are fighting Raila Odinga. They get it very wrong. These are complaints from Kenyans, even including that man called Raila Odinga is a Kenyan who is entitled to complain where he is not comfortable, and who is entitled to be listened to, not to be brutalized, not to be fought using institutions of state to which he has contributed as a Kenyan, just as a taxpayer. You know, using bullets and tear gas, which we have bought, using police services, which we support, all of us together as Kenyans. That thing really, really is extremely unfortunate, and it's part of what we are fighting, and we do not have to be within institutions of governance to fight.
To do so.
Yeah.
But would it be helpful? Would it be prudent? I suppose is my simple question. I know you can do it outside of it, but are there plans to re-engage? With
the kind of people we have in leadership of the country just now, you know, Kenyatta, Ruto, and so on, the people who are in charge of security services, particularly the police and so on, no, we have absolutely no interest in engaging with them within what they have defined. You know, I think I've told you in this show before, they want us to engage at the level of distributive governance, and that's what, again, Priscilla is talking about, sharing cakes and bread. That's not what we want. We want to engage at the level of constitutive governance, defining the environment in which that bread is baked.
I suppose I'm also asking from the perspective of those who are, I mean, these are elected leaders who are expected to carry out certain responsibilities for their electorate. How do they do so effectively, continuously being outside of the formal structure of
Once
Parliament?
The institution of Parliament has been undermined, as it has, and many other institutions, and they failed, it doesn't matter how many good MPs you send in there, they will not be effective. It has to be, this war has to be fought using alternative means, because the institutions we have, most of the institutions we have totally been compromised, as some of the questions Gachuri asked, for example, even just the police. You would expect that all they do is they secure an environment in which political, legitimate, legal, constitutional, political duels happen without taking any sides. But we are not there. We are where they totally are Jubilee police. So why should we have any confidence and hope in these institutions? The institution of Parliament particularly has been completely perverted because of electoral fraud. Why should we have any confidence that Parliament can give us anything?
Yeah, let me just quickly add something in terms of what he's saying. The difficulty with taking these conversations outside formal structures is that now nobody can provide a solution. If these conversations happen within the governance structures, there can be solutions. For example, on police brutality. If you take it within the law, within the legal system, if there are any bad apples in the police force, you are able to take care of those and you are able to redress those particular cases. But if these things go to the street, there isn't much solution in the street. There's a lot more solution in the institutions of governance. For example, in Parliament, they are going to chair the two main committees on oversight, both the parliamentary accounts and the public investments. And in every of the parliamentary committees in Parliament, you do find that that they will find space. And you know, NASA likes to say they have tyranny of brains. Surely those brains must then come to the governance structure so that some of the issues can be redressed there. And the cake I was saying is not the nusumkate, is the cake in terms of development, and that is where we all need to go.
Dr. Kamal?
Yeah, sorry.
Well, first, and I think one of the issues we have to acknowledge is that elections tend to be a divisive, they are divisive across the world. Even after the US elections, people are left with feelings of anger and bitterness and even feelings of betrayal. And I think that will be part of our environment for quite some time. But I think the important thing in looking at the broader issues, why I was talking about return to constitutional order, is the fact that the constitution which we made together and promulgated together has actually specified ways through which, number one, we can engage on different issues, but the other thing is even how we can resolve our disputes. But most important, even when you talk about inclusion and making sure that everybody participates in the whole process, including what Simeka is talking about in terms of governance, I think when you look at, for example, devolution, we talk about the 47 counties. NASA has actually good representation within the counties. They're in control of specific counties where actually the constitution again guides and stipulates how they are supposed to be run. The other thing is NASA is properly represented within Parliament, both the National Assembly and the Senate. And I think those are formal constitutional structures that have been stipulated. Now, to agree with Mheshimiwa Nyokabi, what she said earlier, the problem is when we decide now to operate outside what is properly defined by the Constitution, we're moving into uncharted waters where there is actually no specific formula and the outcome can only be chaos. What I think in terms of moving the country forward, I know it was a disputed and a hotly contested election, both the first one and the second one, there were disputes around this. But I think what is important in terms of moving the country forward is that there will be a swearing in next week. Currently, there's still somebody who is occupying State House, whether recognized by everyone or not. What will happen is that the structures of government will continue operating, the Parliament will still continue operating, judiciary will still continue dealing with issues, again, as stipulated by the Constitution. And that is what is important for all of us to agree the bindingness of the Constitution in terms of us operating within the constitutional provision so that we can find our solutions within that Constitution. Now, maybe my final point on this one is the fact that I said we have privileged politics over everything, such that when we want to look at exclusion, when we want to look at poverty, when you talk about want to look at underemployment or unemployment, we only want to look at the political angle. But there are other issues. When you look at a county like Mandera, for example, when you talk about infant mortality, you talk about maternal health. Those are issues that are of great concern there. When you talk about other areas, when you talk about child vaccination, for example, in West Pokot, where they could be lagging behind, these are real issues. We do not need to introduce the political angle to resolve these issues within the structures of the Constitution, within devolution, and also the national vision. This is actually what we want to use to address these specific issues going forward.
Gashuri, this swearing in will officially mark the commencement of the president's second and final term. And I mean, it has been quite clear from Jubilee, you'll hear from insiders, the legacy question is a very big deal for them. What will President Kenyatta's legacy be? Perhaps even possibly beyond him himself, what will be the Kenyatta legacy be, him being the son of the founding president? What do you believe the issues are going to be for the party, for the president, especially being sworn in, with even greater acrimony a second time round?
And every president wants to be remembered for something. And I believe the same case applies to President Uhuru Kenyatta. And more importantly, even his deputy who is eyeing the presidency in the subsequent election in 2022 is also keen on how they will manage the country and bring people together. And more importantly, well, development is important and is good and is desirous, and every part of the country wants to develop. How the environment in which that development happens is important. The last, let's say, 6 months or so, people in business and the people who manage our country's economy have been saying that we have stagnated. Actually, the economy has not been doing very well. And this is as a result of political acrimony. That goes to show that when a country has political friction, all the other attendant aspects of the economy and the country's growth are affected. When you have running battles in the city and other parts of the country every other day, it means our economy takes a kick. Education suffers. You saw the nurses were on strike for quite a while. So what is important for the president is how he probably will coin his legacy and his entire term. More when you look at what his supporters are saying in terms of you've been going out there taking development elsewhere and forgetting our region. He needs to balance the two. However, as he leaves the country, you remember what happened to retired President Mwai Kibaki. A lot of development is attributed to his term. But there's an argument that he succeeded in building the economy and bringing development, but the political question, he got a dismal performance. So will the same case apply for President Uhuru Kenyatta, both on development and on bridging the gap? Whether he will immediately after the swearing in bend backwards and invite the NASA team or create a structure for engagement in terms of dealing with attendant issues, i.e. the electoral system, let's say how resources are divided in the country, the whole question of how the security agencies are structured and how they perform will be important. And we will keep an eye on to see what he will be saying on that specific day and whether he will be putting to action that which he will say in his speech on Tuesday moving forward.
What are the priorities, Priscilla, for the party in terms of legacy?
I think quite a lot of things are on the table. We've got a fairly well-defined manifesto with a lot of issues. I think the big ones are on roads and infrastructure, and then there's a big part on the 57 water dams. I'm personally always excited about water because of the capacity that we have in terms of agriculture. There's quite a lot on the social protection, the 70 plus, waiting for the NHIF and waiting for the cash transfer program. There's quite a lot on the maternal program that he started earlier. He's going to scale it up into the 1 year post-baby care, I think postnatal care through the NHIF. I think that's a big one too. There's quite a lot in terms of youth and the programs around job creation, the 1 million jobs every year. So there's a lot of, there's a big manifesto. I personally have always hoped that he can pick up one thing, like the expansion of what we had with the Thika superhighway. I hope that he does. In that region, the highway is supposed to be expanded from Keno up to where our former governor passed on, down to Nyeri. And that would be a road that carries a lot of people. So I hope that he picks up also signature projects, maybe 5 or so, that are going to be a mark of his legacy. I'm with Gashuri on this point of parking the political question. I'm getting a bit afraid because the country has got to make options. If we go into a full-blown constitutional review exercise, we may as well forget development. We're not going to be able to run the two programs at the same time. So I'm hoping that the president, God will give him the wisdom to push the economic agenda and create a structure that then absorbs all these other political questions and tries to find solutions. So I think that he could create a very good structure, a consultative structure, a structure that includes everybody. I hope on that day he comes with an olive branch, put the structure that is going to deal with the political questions, because look, this constitution that we have now, we spent 20 years looking for it. I don't think that the country has another 20 years to spend answering the same questions. There's only one person who can be in State House at a time. There's only one governor at a time. There's only one senator at a time. Let's not spend too much time on those questions. Let's spend a little bit more time on, once the president has assumed office, what does it mean for Kenya? What does he do for us? Let's not worry too much about who is in State House, about who is on this seat and who is not on these cities. Once the person has taken that power and that office, what then do the rest of us get? That way, the politics can take a back seat. The issues of health, issues of education, like I'm excited about the free secondary that's going to come in, so that takes a lot of our students, because now the class 8 certificate is almost like a not even semi-skilled. I think is almost no skills at all. So you have to take people up to secondary school, as many students as we can into secondary school. And I'm hoping that all the money that was available for bursaries can then go into college, because we still have very poor transition rate from secondary on to college. Those conversations, and somebody like Simeha here is, I mean, if we were on a conversation today, not about the exclusion, not about, if we were on a conversation on how to transit our students from primary to secondary and from secondary to tertiary institutions and universities, you will find that we now have points of convergence, that at that point in time, it is the number of students in Homa Bay, it is the number of students in Nyeri. So, but he has to find a structure. I don't see him escaping a structure structure to deal with these political issues. Because if it doesn't do that, then the political issues will come back with a bang, and then the next 5 years we will see much repressed development and again the same old questions. I don't think that we can afford an election between now and 2022. I personally don't think we can afford. I don't think it's necessary. The Constitution doesn't provide for it. There should be no reason for us to go into another election between now and 2022 unless the by-elections arising out of the petitions. What we should now have is a structure that takes the concerns and the issues raised, but a very robust, a very rapid, a very keen initiative. And President, must lead us by action, that we are moving into development. I don't want a conversation on demonstration. Give me a conversation on employment of young people. That way the country move forward.
I don't know whether I'm allowed to say this, but
well, you're here, you may as well.
You're a panelist.
I would look at it this way. Politics and development are intertwined. History has shown us. In fact, if there's any evidence to that, the last 1 year has demonstrated that clearly. And what we have as a country, in my opinion, is the question of feelings of exclusion. And that is what the president in his second term must address as a matter of priority. When one part of the country feels excluded from the national government or from, let's say, this cake, there will be resentment, and that resentment breeds anger, and that anger breeds anarchy. What you've seen in the last few months or so, you see young people who are disillusioned, who are angry. It is because of that feeling of exclusion and resentment. Well, he will have to deal with the development question, and I also think the country will need to deal with the question or the review of how workable our constitution is moving forward. And while Priscilla says the next election we are likely to have is 2022, I don't know why I have a feeling that midway, maybe 2020 or thereabout, we could be prepared for a referendum. More so to deal with fundamental issues in the constitution, i.e. system of government, because there is a feeling that the pure presidential system of government is good, but is not necessarily workable for our country. Because when you can only have one president at a time, one deputy president at a time, and there can only be two people at a time to occupy these two positions. What happens to the rest of the country? There probably will be a need to have a more inclusive system. I think it's bad politics, in my opinion, where one part of the country or the other part of the country must feel that we have our person in there.
Exactly. I was just going to ask you that. I mean, are we talking about real representation? Maybe unless my tribe is there. So how many positions are these?
Maybe as we move on and our democracy matures, people will understand that you don't necessarily need to have your person there for you to develop. But deal with the system of government, but at the same time deal with how to improve devolution. When you look at the first term of governors who are in office, there are some parts of this country that have for the first time experienced real development. I mean, go to parts of Wajir and you can see Turkana and other areas, you can see they are feeling that they are fruits of devolution and development is coming to their part. So maybe we'll need to improve how devolution is implemented in terms of structure and so on and so forth. But the question of inclusion is important. In the interim, once the president is sworn in, how he will constitute his cabinet is also critical. That's part of what we'll be keeping a very keen eye on. Who is appointed to the cabinet, why, the question of merit versus inclusion versus the politics of the country.
Versus rewarding people.
Versus rewarding people. There's also a possibility that you will see a more political cabinet than you saw in the first
Gachuri,
term.
you're jumping the gun because I wanted to talk about that in terms of how government will be structured going forward. But unfortunately, we're at the top of the hour. We have to take a break. We'll return with Simeha and Dr. Kamau addressing the legacy questions that the Jubilee administration will be facing. Stay with us on Citizen Extra.